At a family gathering to transfer the inheritance, my parents shocked me by giving the entire $5 million to their favorite daughter and telling me to work harder. Then my grandpa stood up and surprised everyone by handing me a $55 million check. My mom shouted, "You can't do this to May." What my grandpa did next left her in complete shock. "So now you decide to show up." Her voice was cold, nothing like the warm tones that had comforted me throughout my childhood. "Grandma, what's going on?" I asked, my words tumbling out as I tried to make sense of what was happening. "They told me you were in a nursing home." "Don't," she said, holding up her hand. That small gesture felt like a physical blow. "Your grandfather called you over and over. He was asking for you on his deathbed, wanting to say goodbye to his little scientist, but you couldn't be bothered to answer his calls or visit him. How could you be so cruel, Sharon?" "Let me see the number he was calling," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, Grandma, I need to understand." She disappeared inside for a moment and returned with a small notepad in her trembling hands. The number scribbled on it was in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. That's not my number," I whispered, staring at the unfamiliar digits. "I've had the same number since high school." "They gave you a fake number." "What do you mean a fake number?" she asked, her stern expression starting to crack. "Your parents said you changed it when you went to university," she said, her voice softer now. "They told us you wanted to distance yourself from us." The pieces began to fall into place. "Grandma, I came here during break. Helen was here. She wouldn't let me in. She said no one was home. Then Mom and Dad told me you and Grandpa were in a nursing home." Grandma's face went pale. "A nursing home? We never." Her voice trailed off, her hands shaking. "Helen and your parents told us you were too busy with your new university life to visit. They said," her voice cracked, "they said you were ashamed of us, that we weren't sophisticated enough for you anymore." "They said what?" My knees went weak, and I leaned against the porch railing for support. "How could they?" "They told us the funeral was at 2 p.m. today," I said, the words catching in my throat. "When I got to the church, it was already over. They said I mixed up the times, but I didn't. I would never." "The funeral was at 10 a.m., Grandma said slowly, realization dawning in her eyes. "Your parents stood there and told everyone how ashamed they were that you couldn't even be bothered to come to your own grandfather's funeral. Helen was crying, saying how she tried so hard to reach you." Tears welled up in my eyes, and before I knew it, I had fallen into her arms. Both of us dissolved into sobs on the front porch, all the pain and confusion pouring out. "He died thinking I abandoned him," I sobbed into her shoulder. "Grandpa died thinking I didn't care." Grandma stroked my hair like she used to when I was little, her own tears falling freely. "We know the truth now. We know." After we dried our tears, Grandma picked up the phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed, but her voice was steady. "Karen? Yes, it's me. I need you, Michael and Helen to come over right away. There are some important documents we need to discuss." "No, it can't wait." When she hung up, she looked at me with determination in her eyes. "They'll be here in an hour. The lawyer is on his way too." When the doorbell rang, Grandma squeezed my hand. "Stay in the kitchen until I call you." I listened from the other room as they entered. I heard Mom's practiced social laugh, Dad's formal tone, and Helen's bored sigh. Then Grandma's voice, sharp and commanding. "Please everyone, take a seat. Mr. William is here to read Thomas's will." That was my cue. I stepped into the living room just as the lawyer opened his briefcase. The looks on their faces were unforgettable. Mom's perfect smile froze in place. Dad's face turned pale, and Helen's jaw dropped in shock. Mr. William cleared his throat and began. "I, Thomas Walker, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament." The room fell silent except for the sound of rustling papers. First came the house, left to Grandma, along with a substantial sum for her care and maintenance. Then the part that made Helen's face flush red with anger, to my granddaughter, Sharon Walker. "I leave my newly constructed laboratory facility at 1550 Pine Street fully equipped and ready for her research work. All necessary permits and paperwork have been processed and finalized." I couldn't believe my ears. Grandpa had built me a lab, my very own research facility. "The remainder of my estate," Mr. William continued, "is to be divided equally between my granddaughters, Sharon and Helen Walker." Helen pushed her chair back abruptly and stood up, her face contorted with fury. But before she could say anything, Grandma raised her hand. "There's more," she said, pulling out a letter. "Your grandfather wanted this to be read as well." I braced myself as she unfolded the letter, memories of Grandpa flooding my mind. "Where should we put this one?" Grandpa would ask each time I brought home a new trophy or diploma. "In the box with the others," I'd reply, pulling out the special cardboard box I kept under my bed. I never displayed my awards, not because I wasn't proud, but because I didn't want to seem boastful. Mostly, though, I knew my success made my parents uncomfortable. Helen, of course, had her own take. Nobody likes a know-it-all, she'd sneer. But she didn't mind asking me for help with her science homework, or better yet, just doing it for her. Helen, that's cheating, I protested, watching her copy my answers. Sharon, help your sister right now. Mom would command in that tone that left no room for argument. Family helps family. And just like that, I'd end up doing Helen's homework, feeling like a fraud but too afraid to stand up to my parents. It became a predictable pattern. Helen would demand, my parents would insist, and I would comply. I hated it, but what choice did I have? Sometimes, I'd overhear my parents talking about me when they thought I wasn't listening. Their hushed voices would drift up the stairs to my room, where I'd be tinkering with my chemistry set or studying the latest research paper. I just don't understand where she gets it from, Mom would say, her tone exasperated. No one in our family is like this. Maybe she was switched at birth, Dad would joke, but there was a seriousness beneath his laugh that cut deeper than if he'd just come out and said he didn't understand me. One evening, after I won another science competition, I heard Dad's voice from his study. He was talking to Helen about her grades, which had been slipping. It's not fair that she's so smart. Helen whined. Listen, sweetheart, Dad said, his voice softening. We need to focus on you. Sharon, well, she'll be fine on her own. I pressed my back against the wall, my hands clenched into fists, fighting back tears. They thought they were justifying their neglect with twisted logic, as if being capable somehow meant I didn't need love or support. At school, I was the weird girl who spent lunch breaks in the laboratory instead of the cafeteria. Sure, people came to me when they needed help with their science homework, but real friendships, those were rare. The only people who truly understood me were Grandma and Grandpa. They were my rocks. They'd listen for hours as I explained my latest experiments or theories, never making me feel like I was too much or too different. Look what I found for you, Grandpa would say, pulling out a stack of scientific journals or some new piece of equipment for my experiments. I thought this might interest you. Despite their love and support, the hole in my heart where my parents' approval should have been felt vast and empty. At school events, I'd watch other families, parents proudly hugging their kids, siblings cheering each other on, and feel a deep ache in my chest. Then came the news that would change everything. I was graduating early. At just 16, I completed all my high school requirements and earned a full scholarship to one of the top universities in the country. The day I left for university felt like taking my first real breath of fresh air. The campus was alive with energy, and for the first time, I wasn't the odd one out. In my advanced chemistry class, I met Sarah and Michael, two people who got just as excited about molecular structures as I did. For the first time in my life, I had friends who understood me. We'd spend hours in the lab, bouncing ideas off each other, laughing over experiments that failed spectacularly, and celebrating discoveries that would make most people's eyes glaze over. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. But even as I thrived in my new environment, part of me still yearned for my family's approval. I'd call home weekly, hoping for something more than the brief, disinterested conversations I usually got. Yes, Sharon, that's nice, Mom would say when I tried to tell her about my research. Then, inevitably, she'd pivot. Oh, did you hear about Helen's new job? She's working at that fancy boutique downtown. It felt like my achievements were invisible, like I wasn't even worth celebrating. I didn't know it then, but my time at university was the calm before the storm. It happened during one of my routine calls home. I was in the middle of my second semester, deep into my research project, when Mom's voice caught my attention. And with your father's condition getting worse, she was saying, probably to Dad, thinking I was on mute. What about Grandpa? I interrupted, my heart suddenly racing. Mom, what's wrong with him? There was a pause, far too long to be innocent. Oh, Sharon, she said, her voice shifting. I didn't realize you were still on the line. It's nothing serious, just a minor health issue. He's already recovering. I'm coming home, I said immediately, already calculating the fastest way to get there. I can be there by tomorrow morning. No, don't be ridiculous, Mom said sharply. You need to focus on your studies. Helen is helping them out. Everything's under control. Something about her tone fell off, but I tried to convince myself I was overthinking. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, so I called Grandma right after. Oh, yes, dear, Grandma said, her voice strangely distant. Helen's been such a help. She comes by often to check on your grandfather. Helen? The same sister who always said visiting our grandparents was boring? Something didn't add up. 2 weeks later, I stood at my grandparents' familiar front door, my heart pounding. Instead of Grandma's warm welcome, I found Helen blocking the doorway. What are you doing here? She asked, her face a mask of fake surprise. I came to see Grandpa and Grandma. How is he? No one's home. She said quickly, too quickly. They're out. Grandpa's sick. Where would they go? I don't know, Sharon. Just go away, she snapped, starting to close the door. Wait, I stuck my foot in the doorway. "Let me come in and wait for them." "No one's home," she shouted, shoving the door hard against my foot. "God, you're so annoying. Just leave." Confused and hurt, I backed away. I tried calling Grandma, but the call went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like her at all. Something was very wrong, and I was determined to find out what. Grandma always kept her phone on for me. Always. So when I couldn't reach her that day, I didn't know where else to go but my parents' house. Maybe they had answers. When I walked into the kitchen, they both turned to look at me, startled. Dad didn't even try to hide his annoyance. "What are you doing home?" he asked, his voice clipped. "I came to see Grandpa and Grandma," I said, trying to study my voice, "but they're not home. Helen wouldn't let me in." "Oh honey," Mom interrupted, exchanging a glance with Dad. Her tone was light, but I could sense something beneath it. "We're going to tell you, your grandparents are in a nursing home." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" I stammered. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "It was a quick decision," Dad said smoothly, not missing a beat. "They needed specialized care. It's better this way." "Which nursing home?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I want to visit them." "They're under quarantine right now," Mom said quickly, her words spilling out too fast. "No visitors allowed. Maybe next time." I wanted to press further to demand an explanation, but something about their calm, practiced responses made me feel like I'd hit a wall. Eventually, I went back to university, but my mind refused to let go of that afternoon. I couldn't stop thinking about Helen's hostile face, my parents' unnervingly smooth answers, and the door I wasn't allowed to step through. Then came the call. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in the middle of an experiment. The fluorescent lights above me seemed louder than usual as my phone lit up with Mom's number. My heart started racing. Something about the timing of the call felt wrong. "Sharon," Mom said, her voice flat, almost emotionless, "your grandfather passed away last night." The test tube I was holding slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor. The sound echoed through the lab like a gunshot. "What?" My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. "No." "When's the funeral?" "Thursday at 2 p.m., she replied. The way she said it felt strange, almost rehearsed. "Don't be late." I didn't bother cleaning up the broken glass. I rushed out of the lab, my mind spinning with grief and confusion. Grandpa was gone. The man who had believed in me, supported me, and encouraged my every step in life was gone. And I hadn't even had the chance to say goodbye. The memories of him flooded my mind during the entire journey home. I held back tears as I thought of his smile, his voice, and the way he would light up whenever I talked about my experiments. At 1:30 p.m. on Thursday, I made my way to the church. The empty parking lot was my first clue that something wasn't right. My footsteps echoed in the silent building as I approached the entrance, dread building with each step. Inside, a custodian was mopping the floor, the faint smell of cleaning products filling the air. "The Walker funerals?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked up from his work and frowned. "That ended hours ago. They held it at 10 a.m. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. The world tilted as I grabbed onto a nearby pew for support. Frantically, I pulled out my phone and called my parents. "Oh, Sharon," Mom answered, her voice dripping with mock disappointment. "You must have mixed up the times. We clearly said 10 a.m. "No," I said firmly, my hand shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone. "You said 2 p.m. I wrote it down." "I know you said 2 p.m. Your grandmother is still in the nursing home," Dad interjected smoothly, "and she doesn't want to see you right now. She's very upset that you missed the funeral." Their words felt like knives, cutting deeper with every syllable. Shaken and desperate for answers, I told them I was heading back to university, but my feet had other plans. Without even realizing it, I found myself driving to my grandparents' house. The familiar street looked exactly the same. The old oak tree, the neatly tended garden, the wind chimes Grandma loved so much. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and there she was, Grandma, the same Grandma who was supposedly in a nursing home, refusing to see me. Relief flooded through me as I moved to hug her, but she stepped back, and the look in her eyes stopped me cold. Her face was hard, unfamiliar, like she was looking at a stranger. "Grandma," I whispered, but the word felt hollow. I didn't know how to process the coldness in her gaze, the sharpness in her posture. This wasn't the woman who had once been my safe haven. I had always been different, captivated by the world around me in ways that confused my family. Even as a child, I'd collect leaves, rocks, or anything else I could examine with a tiny magnifying lens I'd taken from a cereal box. While Helen played with dolls and dreamed of being a princess, I was asking questions my parents didn't have time to answer. "Mom, why do leaves change color in fall?" I'd ask, holding up a bright, red maple leaf. "Ask your teacher, Sharon," Mom would reply, barely glancing at me. I'm busy helping Helen with her dance costume. This was my childhood. A constant stream of questions about science and the environment met with dismissive answers. When I was 7, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a collection of household objects spread out in front of me. I was experimenting, fascinated by the reaction of baking soda mixed with different liquids. "What in heaven's name are you doing?" Mom's voice broke my concentration. "Observe this," I said proudly, holding up the fizzing mixture. "Now clean it up," she snapped. "I need the kitchen spotless. Helen's friends are coming over for her birthday party." Helen's birthday parties were always extravagant affairs with dozens of guests, life-sized cartoon characters, and endless entertainment. In stark contrast, mine were small, quiet gatherings with just my grandparents and a plain cake. I didn't complain, but the difference was glaring. "Here's your birthday present, sweetheart," Dad would say, handing me yet another copy of a scientific encyclopedia. And while I genuinely loved those books, it was hard to ignore the mountain of toys and gadgets Helen unwrapped at her celebrations. Even then, I knew where my parents' true focus lay. And now, standing in front of my grandmother, her cold stare boring into me, it felt like my family had finally turned their backs on me completely. I'll always be grateful for my dad's parents, my grandparents. They were my haven, the one place where I felt truly understood. Every weekend and school vacation, they'd welcome me with open arms. "Tell me more about what you've learned this week, little scientist," Grandpa would say, his eyes lighting up as I excitedly shared my latest discoveries. His genuine enthusiasm made me feel seen, valued, and special. Helen never came with me to visit them. "They're so boring," she'd complain. "Besides, Mom and Dad are taking me to the new theme park this weekend." I'd watch from the window as they drove off without me, my chest tightening with a mix of hurt and jealousy. "Why can't I go too?" I asked once, desperate to be included. "Oh, honey," Mom replied absent-mindedly, rubbing my head, "it wouldn't be fun for you. You'd probably just want to learn how the rides work. That's how it always was." I didn't fit the mold of what they wanted in a daughter. I was the one who asked too many questions, who preferred microscopes to makeup, while Helen was the perfect match for their ideal, a normal girl with conventional interests. Everything changed when I started middle school. The first person outside of my grandparents to truly see me for who I was turned out to be my science teacher, Mrs. Peterson. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, your daughter has extraordinary potential," she said during a parent-teacher meeting. I sat just outside the classroom, but I could hear every word. I've never seen a student grasp difficult scientific concepts so naturally. "We should consider moving Sharon into the gifted program." I recognized the tone of disapproval in Mom's voice instantly. "That sounds like a lot of work," she said flatly. "She's doing fine where she is. Besides, we have to think about Helen. Sharon shouldn't get preferential treatment." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. They were going to say no. They always did when it came to me, but then Grandma found out. The very next day, she stormed into my school like a general preparing for battle. She stood in the principal's office, her voice unwavering and sharp. "My granddaughter will take those exams and be given every opportunity she deserves," Grandma said firmly. "I don't care what her parents think." The principal hesitated. "But, Mrs. Walker, we need parental consent. My son and his wife will be under my care," Grandma said coldly. "You just make sure Sharon gets her chance." And somehow, she made it happen. After a week of heated arguments and, I suspect, some financial persuasion from my grandparents, my parents reluctantly agreed to let me take the placement tests. I excelled in every single one of them. Suddenly, my world opened up in ways I never imagined. The gifted program introduced me to international science competitions, academic Olympiads, and research seminars. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who thought like me, who got excited about the same things I did. It felt like coming home. My first international competition project focused on sustainable ecosystems, and I won. Then I won another and another. I threw myself into the work, fueled by a passion that had always been inside me but had finally found its place to shine. That moment around Grandma's dining table was one I'll never forget. She stood there, Grandpa's letter in her hands, her voice strong and steady. "To my son and daughter-in-law," she began, "your treatment of your daughters has been shameful. Each child deserves equal love and support, yet favoritism has poisoned this family. Stop." Helen shrieked, jumping to her feet. "This is ridiculous. Why should she get anything?" Helen's outburst stunned the room. She turned on our parents, her voice shrill. "You promised. You said if I played nice, if I visited him and acted like the perfect granddaughter, everything would be mine. You made me grovel to a dying man." Her words hit like a slap, exposing the ugly truth of their manipulation. She wasn't mourning Grandpa. She was furious that her performance hadn't earned her the reward she expected. "And now what?" she continued, her voice rising. Little Miss Perfect gets a whole laboratory, and I only get half the money? Give me the house. She doesn't need both. She can keep her stupid lab. I sat there, silent, as my sister's mask cracked, revealing her true colors. The perfect daughter act was gone, and all that remained was entitlement and anger. Mom finally broke the tense silence. Sharon, you heard your sister. Be reasonable. Do you know how much we've invested in your education? All those science camps, competitions. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. You didn't pay for any of that, I said quietly. Grandma and Grandpa did. That's not the point, Mom snapped. Family means sacrifice. If you want to honor your grandfather's memory, you'll sign over your share to Helen. She needs it more than you do. Honor his memories? Grandma's voice cut through the room like a whip. She stood up, Grandpa's letter still in her hands. Let me remind you exactly what Thomas had to say about this family's idea of sacrifice. She read on, her voice unwavering. To my son and his wife, your blatant favoritism has created poison in this family. Your treatment of Sharon has been nothing short of emotional abuse, while you've turned Helen into an entitled, spoiled, how dare you? Helen shrieked. No. How dare you? Grandma thundered back, her voice shaking with emotion. You deceived and manipulated a dying man, and now you have the gall to talk about sacrifice and families. Grandma stormed to the door and threw it open. Leave. All of you. I'm only sorry Thomas left you anything at all. Helen, you are nothing but a pampered, self-centered daughter who learned her behavior from her pampered, self-centered parents. The slamming doors and shouted threats echoed as they left, leaving the house eerily silent in their wake. It's been 5 years since that day. Grandpa's research facility, the one he built for me, is my home now. It's more than I ever dreamed of, and sometimes, when I'm working late at night, I swear I can feel his presence, proud, loving, and always encouraging. Grandma visits often, her curiosity as sharp as ever. She likes to ask about my latest projects, and she even takes community college science courses, claiming they help her understand my work better. But I think she just wants to share in the excitement Grandpa and I always had. As for Helen and my parents, I haven't spoken to them since. Sometimes I see their names pop up on my phone or in my email inbox, but I delete the messages without reading them. They made their choice, and I made mine. The other day, I found an old photo tucked into one of Grandpa's books. It showed a younger me peering through a magnifying lens in his yard while he pointed something out. On the back, he had written, "My little scientist will change the world someday." I keep that photo on my desk now. It reminds me that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who believe in you, who love you for who you are, and who celebrate your differences instead of trying to change them.